Live. We should be live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Magnum Opi podcast. Yep. I may as well end the stream there on that note. So this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Christmas Carol. Joining me today, we have got Quackhouse.
Hello.
We have got Brandig.
Good morning from the States.
We've got the Bloke.
Hello.
Freelance Bishop.
Hello, good evening from the Netherlands.
Mr. Lizard.
Another good evening from the Netherlands.
And Justine.
Who is muted?
Yes, so I'll say hello on her behalf. So, welcome. As you can see, this episode we're going to be taking a look at A Christmas Carol.
Hello.
And we're just... Yep. And we're just going to dive straight into it, I think. So, let's take a look. There's the edition there. Nice vintage Dickens copy, which comes with some of his other Christmas stories. I just wanted to get people in the festive mood. Let's take a look at... There's not much that I want to cover on Dickens. But I do like to take a look at the author first and see if anyone has anything they want to talk about him before we move on to the book. Before we touch on the book, can someone summarize the book for me? Someone's typing.
So it's basically a story about a man who eats some bad gruel and suffers a series of hallucinations.
Right. No, I'm gonna. Anyone that tries to deconstruct it at the moment, I'm going to mute. So someone step up.
Okay. It's basically about a man who hates Christmas and who has a nephew, and then has a midlife crisis and a bad dream. And then he has a mental breakdown. And
right, no, that's it.
Is it a dream?
Where's the mute button? Where is it? Gone. Justine, give us a sensible answer.
It is about a miserly man who has grown very tight with age, let's say, and he does hate Christmas, but just sort of hates things in general. He sort of seems to hate people, and his partner has died, and he is visited by the spirit of his partner, and then by three ghosts who represent the past, present, and future, and they offer him an opportunity to repent and embrace Christmas.
Yes, exactly. See, we can get a nice answer out of someone. I just wanted to touch on this book because I think that especially in 2020, in the crazy world that is 2020, we need to bring a bit of Christmas cheer. And we're not going to do that by deconstructing it and calling it a bad dream. Like some people.
Yeah, those are the worst episodes. Those are the worst episodes.
They're just bullying a man. It's the old man.
I think it's because the book is very familiar to people that they're sort of ready to, characterize it in other ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's actually the Bloke. I do want you to step forward and talk about the BBC version I think you said you'd watched, because we'll talk about deconstructing. I mean, this is just vile. Their edition, I mean, it sums up the BBC pretty well, actually. Take something that's jovial and turn it disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, it was a while since I've seen it, and I've successfully blocked a lot of it out of my mind. But the bits that really stuck were the something about him being basically given by his father to a school to be molested by this teacher for some sort of exchange. I can't remember what the father got out of it, but it implied that the father was benefiting from the situation until his sister rescued him from there. But it's all that sort of stuff basically in each episode. Just he's basically buys up all these companies and then exploits the workers until they die, and has mines collapse that he buys because he stops paying for the mining equipment to be good enough. And he tries to he sort of has this weird Me Too incident with Cratchit's wife, where he basically makes her strip naked in front of him and and was going to force her to have sex with him, and then laughed at her and said it was all just a test to see how depraved she could be. So
Sounds more like BBC projection.
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Jimmy Savile, ...
Yeah.
Does he have
They
a
don't
writing
really
credit?
Draw your own
They didn't have
comparisons.
They didn't really have a high place to stand on, really, do they, with Jimmy Savile?
So how old is it? Does he have a writing credit?
No. I think it's Tom Hardy that's involved in that, because all of his BBC stuff. It's the same people that made Peaky Blinders, I think, if I remember correctly.
Well, I mean, that does
God.
slightly get back to Dickens as an author, in that a lot of his characters are intentionally caricatures that are drawn to illustrate a specific point.
Yeah.
And with the BBC's interpretation of Scrooge, they had to recharacterize him as essentially the worst possible individual conceivable. So they had to go in that direction.
It's because the nuance is no longer allowed.
Yes.
You have
It's
to have
like
a
the
black or white
1980
character.
It's like the
Not-
1984
morally
description
as well.
of. Yeah.
Did they give him any kind of? Did they let him off at all because he's been molested or whatever in this version?
From what I remember as well, he basically didn't give in to any of the ghosts until the last possible moment. Like he was holding out as being like evil until the last, the last moment, and then I think like Timmy falls in a lake or something.
Oh, well.
I don't know. It was literally it was something like that. And then he like has to
and there was-
decide whether he wants to save
Okay,
the child's life.
And
or
there was a
not.
dog, and the dog went
I'm
like.
shutting this down. No. Yeah. We've made our point. It's vile. Let's go back to the actual authentic book.
The real story.
Yes.
Can I just comment on the caricature thing first?
Yeah, of course.
He is depicted as an oyster. He's compared to an oyster at one point, which is interesting. So you imagine his face as an oyster, but I think it's appropriate because an oyster clutches at a pearl, right? A thing of value. So that's their way of, showing that he was miserly.
That he's really closed in his expression. So it might be really figurative.
There's quite a lot of use as food to illustrate a point in this. I mean, let's hold this 1 second. I just want to. I haven't done a slide for the influences as I usually do, just because it's quite hard to to put it on a slide because the main influences do just come through the actual Christmas stories that he was exposed to growing up. And the other main influence is his desire to use his writing to enforce his political and social ideas. Now, I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of discussion about that, but that they're the main influences. When it comes to the legacy, it's going to be quite hard to understate just how much of a legacy he left behind. Now, these are a little bit obscure. On the left, as you can see, is a humbug. I just wanted to put that down as he did. He basically brought it to English lexicon. It was used previously, but not anywhere to the extent that people will use it then or now as a grumble, especially during the Christmas period. So that one was popularized by Dickens. On the right, that I just wanted to use as an illustration of he literally is a founding member of what brought back Christmas after the Reformation. I mean, it was brought back prior to this book, but so much of what we now know as Christmas can be attributed to this book. It's really hard to understate how much of an influence he had.
The Christmas meal was pretty much described quite thoroughly, wasn't it? In one of the chapters. Yeah.
Well, this is why I mentioned the food. I mean, the food was massive in the book and has obviously been brought through to what we think of Christmas now. Not only that, but the entire interactions with the family. There's a perfect quote, which is he says something to the extent of it's good to sometimes behave as children, and what better time than Christmas as its founding father it was a child himself, something like that. So he really like games at Christmas, everything that we associate with it. So much of it can be attributed to Dickens.
It's also one of the most interpreted into film works, of which I'm aware. I mean, there's so many different versions and variants of A Christmas Carol that have been translated into film over the years that it pretty much beggars imagination. Almost everything that's been long running has at some point made reference to it.
Yeah, on the Wikipedia page that I found, which is dedicated to adaptations of Christmas Carol, it lists 50. Now I'm certain they are lowballing that by quite a margin. Funnily enough, one of the main competitors for most films adaptations is also Frankenstein. That's probably the only thing that beats it, and Sherlock Holmes. They're the biggest three, I think.
There's a nice parallel for us in that it's a ghost story, like Frankenstein was.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna touch on that and see where people stand on it, because I'm of the firm belief now that it is an encapsulation of one of the perfect Gothic stories. But I want to see where people stand on that. So, obviously, the middle one I've put down is to represent how much it's affected later media. So, one other thing that I found digging around, this was Wikipedia was my main source for this, so take it as you will. Apparently Thomas Carlyle found the book so joyous that he started throwing Christmas dinners of his own to in celebration.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, which, given his reputation as being quite a stern Scot. Yeah, I mean, maybe he saw a lot of himself in Scrooge. That's all I can say. So, let's go on to the characters. When we go through, something I haven't made note of, but I do want to touch on, is with Dickens in all of his works, he's very on the nose with names. And I just want to take a second to kind of deconstruct some of the names as we go along. So, obviously, to begin with, we have the protagonist, Ebenezer Scrooge. And when it comes to the names, there's two things that jump out to me on this. There's Ebenezer and his partner, Jacob, which are moneylenders, and I don't really want to give any more hints of where they might have had an inspiration than that, really.
Well, Old Testament, let's just say that, right?
Yes. So obviously there's a bit of an influence there, but also the surname, I think just Scrooge itself in the word kind of sums up his original attitude. The word is screwed up, scrupulous. Dickens is very good at giving on the nose names. So who wants to start off by talking about Ebenezer? If anyone.
Well, there's a big gap between the child that we see and the man that we meet at the beginning. And we kind of understand throughout the course of the narrative kind of how that gap is closed. We see, what's happened. I mean, it doesn't sort of explain everything, but it gives us some hints, the changes. But when we meet him, he's this sort of tall, probably skinny, because skinniness in Dickens always suggests, tightness. The more sort of fat person will denote a kind of more generous personality, typically in Dickens.
Yes, yeah. There's definitely a scale on which weight represents happiness when it comes to Dickens' work.
Well, he also, being the protagonist, he has the greatest character growth and character arc in the novel, but it's a very well developed and well built arc that sees some mirroring in his youth as well as in the later parts of the book. It's almost a restoration arc rather than a development arc.
Yes, restoration and redemption. Yeah. What are you going to say?
I was going to say, it doesn't quite finish his arc, though, does it? Into becoming what he becomes. Like it misses something out for me. It goes from him being quite happy after having a fairly miserable childhood, presumably, until he starts his apprenticeship, and then his apprenticeship seems quite happy, and then he seemed quite happy. He gets a long time girlfriend, could become a wife, and then something happens. Either it's just his drive for success or his money accumulation, and then he becomes Scrooge. Like there's something missing.
All we get is that he's been sort of seduced by money, essentially, by filthy lucre.
Yeah. He's made a decision for some reason to prioritize one thing over another, I guess.
Yeah, and his then love interest makes this speech about how, according to her, it's his own fears, his own inadequacies, kind of, but it's also not elaborated as to why he's that afraid.
I think there's this with fiancés, there's this kind of tension between perhaps the woman who is keen to get married and start life and the man who's worried that he hasn't got enough money to do so yet. So so that she'll be pushing in one direction. He might push back as he thinks he doesn't have enough. But then Dickens shows us families who have plenty of kids and are rather poor, like the Cratchits, but still have good lives.
Yeah, well, family and personal connections is the main takeaway from the book for me. Like, how you should prioritize one over the other.
You say it is, or it isn't.
So, yeah, for me, the takeaway is that you should prioritize these connections over, just accumulation of wealth and.
Exactly. And I don't think it doesn't delve too much into why he's, as a young adult, decided to prioritize that. But I don't really think it matters because some people do just especially when they first go into the working world, and with him, he's starts accumulating wealth. His desire to keep on accumulating overtakes his desire to build up any relationships with people. So I don't really think it needs any more explaining than that.
Well, I think that was the position with which Dickens approached the character, in that it didn't really matter the why of how he got where he was, only that where he was needed to be explained, and it needed to be explained what he gave up to get there, and why what he gave up was of greater value than what he gained.
Yes, and there's actually, Justine, did you want to make a point?
Sorry, no, I'm just
okay. There was actually a G.K. Chesterton quote on his thoughts on it, which really stood out to me, which kind of sums it up, which is whether the Christmas visions would or would not convert Scrooge, they convert us. So, the restoration of Christmas is the main goal of it, and it doesn't really matter what got Scrooge into the position he's in. The fact that he goes through these stages and gets re-imbued with the Christmas spirit is all that matters, really.
I think I can disagree with that, because if Scrooge doesn't get re-imbued, why would we? So the goal is to reinvigorate the spirit of Christmas, but you do this through this character, and this character, he starts out like a loner, and he never learns actually the value of Christmas as a child. So he's alone at school, at boarding school during Christmas, while all his friends are gone. So the only thing he has are his books. So he talks about the 1001 Nights and Alibaba and such. And then at one point, his younger sister comes to pick him up and take him away, and she tells him, like, father has changed now. He's much nicer now. So you already get the idea, like, okay, this is a family where people have this midlife crisis or brain damage or whatever, and afterwards they're friendly people. So and you see the same thing happening to Ebenezer. And if he can change, if he can understand the spirit of Christmas, then so can you. And it's wonderful. That's the message of the book.
Yeah, the vicarious experience of the main character is expected to be reflected in the reader, and for good or ill.
Yes, but I think even if he did, I agree, and I think it works better this way. But I think even if he didn't, you can still learn from his mistakes. And I also don't really think the book would be written unless he has that conversion at the end. It would be.
It's very Dickensian that he would actually accede to the conversion. I mean, that's kind of the core of a lot of the things Dickens wrote, the transformation of the characters, and that his recommendation to the reader that they should mirror the character.
Yes. Yeah.
One
Okay.
of
Carry on.
one of the central points with Scrooge is that, I mean, he could, if he was glass half empty, he could say, well, why should I celebrate Christmas? I'm not married. I don't have children. I'm here all alone. But he actually learns to appreciate what he does have in his life and kind of cultivate and make the most of his nephew, his connection to.
You also have to take into account that his business partner, and probably the only person he would have called a friend, because he and him thought the same about charities and such. That the business partner died on Christmas, so he's reminded of that every time.
Someone's making quite a bit of noise.
It's right.
Okay.
So he's reminded every Christmas about the fact that that his partner died. So he also feels like he hasn't moved on from that point. He's still stuck. That's also why he still identifies as both Marley and Scrooge. It's still Marley and Scrooge. The company is not called Scrooge, and so that's how he feels. And he basically, during the story, at the end of the first chapter, he already becomes unstuck. Because he sees what's going to happen to him after death, and it's not nice.
Well,
his major flaw is that he's hyper practical, isn't it? Everything he's overly practical about everything.
I'm not certain that that's his major flaw. His major flaw is his value hierarchy.
Yes, I just before we move on, I do just want to mention when it comes to him keeping the name on there. I know that's how you read it, and I agree. But the other way that I read it as well is that he is so miserly and penny pinching that there's no benefit in removing Marley's name, and so why spend the money to remove it? I think.
And there's also the fact that this reputation's already been built up with these two names attached to it, which you wouldn't want to get rid of. But like I said, there's no fat on anything. There's no fat on him. He doesn't buy anything that he conceives to be, just excess. He's like
even his home life. He just has like one tiny fire in one room, and he doesn't use any of his wealth in any obvious ways. I mean, that we're actually told in the
he's
book.
not sort of luxuriating at all.
Yeah, he doesn't profit mentally from his wealth beyond just knowing that he has it.
Yeah, it's also mentioned that he answers to both names equally. So
yeah,
he kind of subsumes Marley's personality into himself.
Again, it's like, what would the point be as far as he's concerned in correcting someone?
Exactly. That's how I take it. Is if it's purely from a business transactions standpoint that he's thinking, it's but why bother correcting them when all I'm going to do is have this interaction and then forget about them. The other
kind of point where it's made very clear that, like, okay, this is an elderly man and he has no children. Like in terms of saving money, like they really do make it incredibly clear that this man has no ulterior motive behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that there's no higher motive. Sorry.
And that's one of the ambiguities of the novel, because there's a lot of things that could be read into there, either that he actually does have vast reserves of wealth, or that he's riding the line, as Bishop suggested, that he might not be as profitable a money lender as he could be, or that he's supporting, as is mentioned in the novel, other organizations that serve his interests, like the workhouses and the prisons and such. He could be a major financier of those and could be beggaring himself in order to support them. None of that is ever explicitly defined within the novel and left open to the interpretation of the reader. Yeah. And I think that's primarily because Dickens doesn't consider any of that to matter.
Exactly, yeah.
All of that is beside the point.
There's no fluff. Or the fluff that is in there is intentional. Like the descriptions of the feasts and things, he could summarize it in a couple of words, but he goes all out and, throws in a dozen different foods that are there and describes them in great detail. So it is, that is, quote unquote fluff, but it's there for a reason. But establishing what he spends his money on doesn't matter. What was that, sir?
Kind of cornucopia, we'll get more into that with the Ghost of Christmas Present, but the, there's this richness around you, which you have to embrace.
Yes, and I think it's very much a rejection of this sort of puritanical figure and embracing the more traditional.
Should we sort of, just for people who don't know, explain what happened during the interregnum?
Yeah, if you want to take the lead on that, just cover what.
So, in the 17th century, during and after the English Civil War, the faction of Parliament that was the puritanical faction kind of won the day, and they wanted to root out any practices that they thought of as pagan, and sort of Christmas got bundled into this. So they got rid of any sort of like maypole dancing, for example, and they saw Christmas as an improper, the way it was celebrated with all the festivity and feasts and alcohol and dancing and all these things that they basically disapproved of. So essentially, Christmas was canceled. And there actually were Christmas uprisings where people ended up getting executed for celebrating Christmas. This happened. So after the Restoration, which is in 1660, I think Christmas started to be celebrated again, but I don't think, probably it took a while before it came back with, got to certainly to where we are now, or to in Dickens' time. Debatable by Dickens' time, but Dickens inscribed Christmas again in a way that hasn't been done since.
I just wait for the Christmas uprisings of 2021.
Yeah.
The closest equivalent would probably be the consumerism adaptation that we now have as the most recent.
We'll rebel and buy tons of presents.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else we want to touch on for Ebenezer? We're going to keep on referring to him, obviously, when we speak about other people, but anything else that stands out now? No, I'll move on.
You go for it.
So let's cover. Who wants to start us on Cratchits and Tiny Tim? I think Tiny Tim, if I'll just mention, I think of him as being the real embodiment of childhood purity. And when it comes to Dickens, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of his writing is politically and socially motivated. And obviously you have this small crippled child. He's not this figure of childhood beauty, but his purity is. And I think that putting him in this household that's very run down, but their Christmas spirit and the soul of the family is still very pure. And very intentional. He didn't want them to be a part of a rich family. It was seeing the light even through this social, this financial hardship.
I mean, they are the embodiment of it's kind of like an idealized family. Everything's kind of good and wholesome, and and Tiny Tim's like kind of like the icing on that cake, isn't he? And even to the point where when he goes to the church and he's saying, he hopes that everybody will be lifted by seeing him as a disabled child, and it's all selfless and perfect, and everybody's nice, but they're decidedly average at the same time, aren't they?
There's nothing particularly special.
But they're even described as looking. I can't remember the exact wording used, but they're described as not even. Oh, they're not an attractive family, isn't it? Something along those lines.
Exactly, and
yet somehow they're all very happy and very,
I like the fact that Tiny Tim, sees himself as a reminder of the miracles of Jesus. Hoping that when he's in church, people will think of the one who made the blind see and the lame walk.
Yeah, it's one of the few. I mean, as an allegory, there's obviously a lot of religious reference, but it's one of the closest. Having him be the child of Christmas is probably one of the closest they get to.
You can compare him to the one of the other children that's introduced. So at the end of the part with the Ghost of Christmas Present, there are two children, and Scrooge asks what will become of them, and basically the spirit alludes to the fact that they will become corrupt, they will become evil, or they will become men if you don't take care of them properly. And you also see this with Tiny Tim. If Scrooge doesn't change, Tiny Tim will die. That's part of the story. So he is like, if he's the embodiment of the spirit of Christmas, if you don't keep it alive, it will die. It will snuff out like a flame.
The loss of innocence of youth.
Yeah, and we will touch on that quote directly when we get to him, because I do think it's one of the most cryptic quotes from the story, I think. I do.
The allegorical figures of the children.
Yes, yeah.
One of the interesting things about Bob Cratchit is his salary is actually mentioned, which gives us an actual time period constant or relative reference we can make to average payment in the period. So
yes, and again, those kind of interpretations we will cover, but I don't think it's really the spirit of the story. But yeah, it is interesting, and actually, I did for a while. I always thought that viewing was quite a modern vision of the story, trying to look at it through this economic lens. But actually, some of his contemporaries did actually say Dickens seems to be a little bit blind to the economic facts of wages.
just to clarify for those who don't know, he's basically paying his employee quite well due to deflation. If you as you said, if you analyze it that way. But as you pointed out, I suspect he just didn't really understand the details like that.
Yeah, it's not just the wages; it's also the show that they put on for their dinner. It's not like they're They are scraping by, but they put on quite a feast for their Christmas dinner. So they are doing. They're getting by.
At that time is pretty much just like two items or one or two items. Not
well, it barely contained meat. That was usually a luxury in the week. But yes.
Dickens was pushing back against utilitarianism with Tiny Tim all around, right? Mm-hmm. Like utilitarian might say, well, what's the point of this little cripple or something, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's thrown back in his... Oh, you carry on, but I think you're probably going to make my same point.
No. I this is an ancillary point. I don't know enough about the time period to understand what exactly is wrong with Tiny Tim. So if someone can enlighten me on what the presumed issue he has is,
I guess rickets, maybe. That was
his arm is withered, right? His hand is withered.
Could it be polio related? Or?
Yeah, that's the only other thing that pops to mind.
I don't know enough about the time period.
Polio is a good guess.
Yeah.
Well, the implication is whatever it is, it's able to be resolved with good medical treatment that can be paid for.
Mm-hmm.
So,
the point I thought you were going to make.
From worsening.
The point I thought you were going to make, just to touch on the utilitarian point, is that argument is actually made by Scrooge, saying, remove the surplus population. If there's people in the streets begging at Christmas and they'd rather die than go to the prisons for food, then let them. That's thrown back in his face when it's relating to Tiny Tim, when he kind of says, this is someone that you could very easily say, not just let him die because he's this crippled child. But now that now you're emotionally invested in him and the family, you might change your mindset.
Stalin famously said, what was it? A million people.
One person is a tragedy. Yeah. A million is just a number. Something.
Yeah,
like that.
It's a statistic.
That was it.
So yeah, let's.
that does get back to the the point, but it's again, Dickens approaches it obliquely and with a clear lack of understanding of the actual value that was provided to society by industrialization and by workhouses and prisons and such. One of the core fundamental changes that occurred with industrialization and with the technological revolution that was occurring was the cities and the bringing in of the workers from the fields, where they were in poor years literally starving to death, but no one knew about it because they were out in the fields and out of sight and out of mind. Whereas in lean years with industrialization and the centralization of labor, they saw people starving on the streets day to day, and children working in workhouses was actually a boon to them at the time.
All right, we'll go on to this discussion now then, because it doesn't look like we're going to be able to hold it off. I'll just move on to Fred, who provides a quote that I think counters it. I agree with the points that you raise, but I don't. There's a Marxist reading of this which I really disagree with when I compare it to a more, funnily, we've mentioned him before, Carlyle approach, which is not that, I don't think that Dickens is against industrialization in and of itself, but the byproducts that it can produce. And I think this quote kind of provides my evidence for it, which is, at no point does he insult the actual quest for gaining riches. It's just if you prioritize that above your fellow man.
And that goes back to the point I was making earlier about the value hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
The Fred is a good example of what I would consider to be a splitting of the difference.
Yes.
He's a materially productive, valuable, profitable individual who at the same time manages to retain his humanity, as it were. And in fact, if you actually look at it, he and Bob Cratchit are the only two people or two characters in the story who actually respect and value their relationship with Scrooge. Pretty much everyone else disdains Scrooge and either has contempt for him or views him through a utilitarian lens. But Fred and Bob Cratchit both respect him as a person and embrace the relationship and wish that they had a more human, emotional connection between them, because they recognize the value that Scrooge brings into their lives.
Yeah, it's not that he makes money; it's that he's very sort of miserly, but not just with money, with love. He doesn't use his money the way so many philanthropists in that period did, actually. Yes,
and I think that is actually partly due to the book, is that a lot of people, there was another, I went through a bit of a list of different deeds that were performed after people read this book, and one of them was, I think it was the Queen of Norway sent gifts to all the poorhouses of London, saying from Tiny Tim or something like this. And just as a demonstration of, it's not this anti-industrialist statement. It's very much because you know this from the interaction between Fred and Bob, where Bob Cratchit is overwhelmingly enamored with Fred when they meet, but Fred is still an industrialist. So I don't think I think that their interaction really proves that it's not against that. If you want to go down the line of putting it in more economic terms, I jotted down that psychic profit is the biggest issue going on here. that Scrooge is quite utilitarian, his thinking, whereas Fred has got the psychic profit of prioritizing the immaterial over the material.
Well, I think this is Bishop's point, so I'm going to let him make it.
Hit me. What do you got?
What?
I think we're in agreement, but
Well, the Bob Cratchit and Fred are both, I think, the only figures who indeed respect Scrooge. And if you look at the people who divvy up his goods after he supposedly dies in the future, and the way they talk about him, that the warmth of his blankets is the only warmth you will get of him. They actually don't see him as a human, but just as a scourge upon society.
Yeah.
The way that he would look at that he describes the surplus population in the beginning. So he basically became something he would despise in the beginning. And
At
I
least
think,
in the eyes of others. But yeah,
Yeah.
continue.
and I think this is one of the many moments that his heart is broken, because he's a bit of like in the beginning he realizes that he needs to change, but then he's like a smoker who says, yeah, one day I will stop, one day I'll quit, I'll quit tomorrow. That's kind of his attitude, but he's confronted over and over again with his poor decisions, and that he actually has a need to change, and that in the end will causes him to have this full transformation instead of just a partial transformation. He doesn't become slightly friendlier, he becomes like the spirit of Christmas itself. So
Yeah, well, being shown his past kind of pushes him a long way, and then it's the present that really hammers it home, isn't it? I mean, he's pretty much changed his tune as soon as he's shown his past, really.
Well, and Christmas yet to come. I think all three of them have put a different nail in the coffin for him. And Marley.
He does start to change quite quickly, doesn't he?
By the way,
take a lot of persuading.
Are those doornails or are those coffin nails?
Yeah, actually that quote. I mean, from the very first page, I do want to just say, anyone listening, go and read this. If you don't have the time, listen to the audiobook. This is one of the few exceptions I will have audiobooks accepted. Usually I will reject them, but I do think that you need, like I say, especially in 2020, the year that we've had, let's get some Christmas spirit going and embrace Christmas Carol. And one of the things that you'll notice from the very beginning, one of the characters we haven't got down, because he's not technically a character, but is the author himself, Dickens. The wit that comes through in Dickens, he is one of the most English authors that could possibly exist, just in some of the witticisms that he throws about. And obviously the one that you mentioned is the dead as a doornail, in his little rant on why it isn't a coffin nail. But yeah, let's unless anyone has anything else on Fred that they want to touch on, let's move on to our next. We have the two portly gentlemen. So again, I think with these two, unless anyone wants to take the reins, I'll just say my piece. They're again just used to tie up the story by bookending his interactions with them, by having at the beginning completely rejected for their request for a charitable donation. No, at the end, once he's filled with Christmas cheer, he goes back to them and then provides them a large sum of money. But I think that I think these two also represent some of the philanthropic people that were around at the time that were very charitable. So it isn't all this doom and gloom when it comes to the industrialization of London in particular.
Yeah, we're presented with examples of excellent capitalists, right?
Yeah,
who do things voluntarily, and it makes us. I mean, I think it's important to consider how the word charity has become kind of impoverished, ironically, because it means brotherly love, but nowadays we just think of it as giving giving a bit of money or here and there or something. But I think really money is just a kind of I think the term is synecdoche, like for love and in general. It's like it represents something bigger, generosity of spirit and love.
Yes.
Well,
sorry.
I was just going to say that the two gentlemen reflect a paradigm shift in the value hierarchy, in that they are, because Scrooge mentions he supports the prisons and the workhouses that are brought up in their conversation, and he says that he has done so for some time. That the implication is he's done so for some time, and that they match his value hierarchy at the beginning of the novel, and then at the end of the novel, he revisits the conversation with the gentleman and switches his allegiance, as it were, from the values he previously espoused to new values. So the recognition of that is not that Scrooge is an ungenerous fellow. It's that his generosity is directed inappropriately, or his values are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is the core fundamental message across which Dickens is trying to convey.
Yes, well, I think at the very beginning, he views all social interaction as a zero-sum game. And that is why, to him, supporting the workhouses and supporting the prisons, he's already paying to them, so why give to a charity that's trying to reach the same ends, which is take people off the streets? Whereas he then realizes that it can actually have an exponential effect if you are boosting the position of these people. They can actually contribute. It's not just this zero-sum game that you're playing. If you boost up the others around you, they can then support you in ways that you weren't even aware of previously. But the big distinction is the fact that it is not state mandated. And this is another thing that I will fight tooth and nail about when it comes to any kind of Marxist reading of this book. all of it is predicated on the fact that it is charitable work, and that it is a moral imperative that you provide, or at least that you assist those in need, especially around the Christmas period, not that you're state mandated to.
And one of the reinforcing points of that is the two portly gentlemen have no power to compel Scrooge to do anything.
Exactly.
In fact, no one in the story compels anyone to do anything, as near as I can recall. This is all about a conversation between individuals, between Scrooge and the ghost, Scrooge and Marley, Fred and his family, etc., about making an argument for people to change their minds, not to compel them. They're just presenting them with the logical consequences of their actions and their current set of decisions.
Yeah, if this was a lefty book, as some people perceive it, then there'd be one of two things. He would either be told that none of it is his fault, it's all a systemic issue with the society that he's in, so he doesn't need to change because it's not him. Or it would be from a different perspective, and he would be the evil capitalist, and the victory of the book would be that his assets are seized and given to Bob. That would be what would be put across if it was actually a leftist reading. But it's not. All of it is him. It's an internal dispute that he has, and it's based on the morality of his actions and not on what he's being forced to do. Like you say, there's no force used on anyone, really. It's all just him going through this process and learning more about himself and how he should interact.
Except his nephew, who comes along and keeps badgering him about Christmas.
Yeah, but that's not force. That's just a relative badgering him.
No, that's not forced.
No, he could lock the door.
I would say it's less of a leftist book than it is a conservative, more of a conservative book than it is a leftist book, in terms of like the family, the importance of family, and those kind of connections.
In fact, there's
over just pure materialism, and obviously the materialism is making these other people happy, but it's kind of like in moderation, and it's more about the family element and the connections rather than the material side.
Yeah, so
obviously he's not material. He's not material at all. If he was a leftist now, obviously the material would be the most important thing.
Yes. So this point, this is actually, this goes back to the argument that was had previously during the Reformation. It's not saying that the material is immoral. It's saying that you cannot prioritize it. So Scrooge, the puritanical view would be that only the immaterial should be valued, and that everything else kind of needs to be either prohibited or thrown away along with all tradition. It's not saying that. It's saying that you can have. There's nothing wrong with having these material joys, but it's why are you doing it? And are you doing it in moderation? And are you taking in the immaterial into account? It's not this black and white view, and I think that's why it's some people try and interpret it as very black and white, but it's filled with lots of vagaries, and that's all essential.
For Scrooge, it extends even to people, doesn't it? Like with the disabled, and getting rid of the people who aren't contributing. So it's like having zero fat on society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's as slimmed down and as sparse as it can be without everybody being like just living in tents or something. I don't know what the alternative would be.
And that tacit contempt for pure materialism is echoed toward the tail end of the novel, when Scrooge's servants are in front of the pawnbroker. That
yes.
they're pawning off his belongings that they've managed to steal, and the entire scene is very
macabre,
scornfully drawn.
Yeah, yes, and they are being shown as basically as bad as he is, but
they're jackals.
Yes, yeah, jackals is the perfect word for them. Okay, let's go on to Jacob Marley. What to say about him? When rereading it, a quote stood out to me. Now I've taken it here, but it can vary. Matthew 16:26. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world, if he loses his soul? This kind of message is prevalent throughout the book. And I think Jacob Marley is obviously, he is the closest to Scrooge. He's kind of a representation of all the three spirits that later visit him put together, because he is both his past, he has been his present, and he is what the future will be unless Scrooge changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he intervened
and there's
to save Scrooge. Gives Scrooge his life.
He basically is a future. Sorry, he basically is a future version of Scrooge. So he shows what Scrooge will be if he keeps going on this path. He's a bookkeeper, or a what are the exact word? The same as Scrooge. And he also says, well, I only cared about the business, and basically it weighed him down, and he is no longer able to help people. And you also see that when he floats outside of the window, that there's this really fat, that spirit of a businessman weighed down by a big safe, and he's trying to help a woman and a child, but he can't, and that's his eternal suffering.
But he can help Scrooge. That seems to be the one person that he can.
Yeah, but he doesn't know why, and he also says it's really restless. So it basically shows that Scrooge is working for what? There's no goal. So and this scares Scrooge a lot. So that's basically how the first chapter ends, where Jacob Marley has visited Scrooge, and Scrooge is already scared for his future, which is logical because he has been shown that basically is on the road to self-destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even when he's back at the pawn shop, the things that he saw no value in, which is like personal possessions, is the only value that they see in him when he's dead. There's no like offspring or other relationships he's cultivated.
Yeah, and they kind of
just the amount of overlap between Jacob Marley and Scrooge that. For some sense, this could also be seen as a redemption arc for Jacob Marley, that he wants to help Scrooge to because they are dealing, or at least were dealing, with the same problems. That it is a bit of a, help yourself almost from Marley's perspective.
That's a good point. I've not actually thought of it that way. But yeah, it's almost a redemption for Jacob Marley as well. And I do
also the fact that...
You carry on.
I was just going to say, with the modern day conception of like the capitalist, like if it had been made now when you were trying to portray a capitalist, or in like the 1984 kind of description of how capitalists were described,
Gordon Gekko, basically.
was that they were all like they would be the fat gentleman, there would be the portly gentleman that was very materialist. So it's almost like a reverse, like if he was like a ultra materialist, if he was getting out his Rolex and hopping into his Rolls Royce,
Yes, but I think like we said with Dickens, there's a weight. The fatter you are, the happier you are. But I think that the reason these kind of spindly characters are portrayed in this way is not because they're this rich fat cats. It's the puritanical angle. I think it's very much based on that that conflict still going on. That he chooses this kind of depiction for a rich person.
Yeah, but I was saying now, if you were describing someone who wasn't a very good person, you would probably apply, it would be the material possessions that would they would use to try and make you think they were a bad person.
Yeah, so they'd be more hedonistic.
Yeah.
Whereas his sin doesn't really come from hedonism; it comes from miserliness.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really think of a villain in anything modern where the person isn't, like the more modern version of capitalism.
No, you've got a good point. This kind of character has kind of vanished for this.
Like he's not selfish, is he? He's not selfish. He's not a materialist. He's like the opposite of selfish and a materialist. Because if he was selfish.
I think the closest person in modern times would be Steve Jobs, because he was really focused on his work, but he never spent a penny on any charity.
Well, he cast himself as a hippie, didn't he? He was.
But yeah, if you look at that, for example, Bill Gates, he does like to show that he spends a lot on charity. So that would be the modern capitalist. So. Yeah, nowadays they're kind of hated and liked at the same time, but for different reasons. It's more moral now.
Yeah, I mean, Scrooge isn't exactly trying to virtue signal, is he?
No, he's the exact opposite. He basically doesn't want to have any social interaction. He obviously, at the beginning of the book, he doesn't like people, and he just wants them to leave them alone, and he just wants to be with his numbers. That's why he also basically dehumanizes. When Bob is asking him for a day off, and then the only good reason that he does that is because there's no profit in it, and anyway, so then working has no use, so then we can take the day off.
One of the interesting points is we're discussing archetypal representations in fiction, and the core translation or transition that I'm seeing here is the condemnation of materialism present in Dickens is fundamentally different than the condemnation of materialism present in modern literature or modern fiction, because it's not a condemnation of materialism sans materialism. It's a condemnation of materialism over humanity. There's a recognition that materialism is necessary for humanity to thrive, but that there's also value to be derived from human interaction. Whereas in modern representations of the archetypal capitalist, it's condemnation of materialism qua materialism. Materialism is viewed as the bad, not the absence of humanism.
Yeah, which when you phrase it like that, doesn't actually through a modern perspective doesn't even make sense. When if your villain is depicting materialism as the enemy, but you have no alternative. It doesn't even make sense as a villain. The only thing that they can use as the villain then is excess, and that is obviously where you kind of see these fat
Fat cats.
Fat cats, yeah, where it's just consumption.
He's a skinny cat.
Yeah, whereas I think because of this kind of puritanical Anglican or Catholic kind of divide that you have in Victorian writing and obviously 18th century as well, and 17th most predominantly, then that's why you see this kind of character emerge, and I think that's why you've seen this sort of character disappear. Is that religious conflict is still there, but it's so small in comparison to the meta conflicts that we have going on at the moment that this character is no longer used.
It's also the fact that
just the man who wrote Rumpole of the Bailey, John Mortimer, he always argued that we're still divided, and like Englishmen are still divided between Puritans and Cavaliers. He was on the sort of like a champagne socialist type, but he considered himself to be there you go. I mean, he considered himself to be a left-wing Cavalier. He said there were right-wing Cavaliers and left-wing Cavaliers, and also the same in the Puritans.
Yeah, I definitely think the divide is still there, especially in England, but it's just been painted up so well with other layers of conflict that a lot of people don't recognize it anymore. But it's definitely still there.
I just wonder if it's more of a fact that there is more stuff to be had now, whereas then, the default would have been not really having a lot. So obviously having stuff isn't as negative, if you know what I mean. Like if you go back to like Road to Wigan Pier and stuff, when I was describing Champagne the Socialist and how he envisages the future, like things are blander, things are more utilitarian, whereas the exact opposite's happened. We've got people who are foodies, and it's gone the exact opposite. Things haven't got blander and more uniform. Things are like over the top, like ridiculous. You just find ways of making burgers pretentious, that kind of thing.
But they apply their puritanical kind of principles to a lot of them to things like veganism,
Yeah, it expresses itself in different ways and less uniform ways now. And I think that's why this conflict is not as recognized, but it's definitely still there.
Well, going back to the portly gentleman's point about the keenness of want being felt, that was actually a mortal danger back in this time period. Whereas today the keenness of want is not having an iPhone. The keenness of want is not having sneakers.
Well, it's demonstrated with Tiny Tim, isn't it? The fact that Cratchit is not helped. I don't know. I mean, obviously he's already paid quite a bit. I mean, I don't know why Tim would suffer, or what Scrooge is actually going to do in order to prolong Timmy's life. It doesn't make it that clear. Does it?
I mean, given the time, it could be as simple as with the pay rise, the heating can be increased. It could be anything as minor as that. Who knows?
Slightly better food.
Yeah, exactly. The diet,
scurvy or something.
Yeah,
in direct injection of sovereigns or English crowns into the bloodstream. I don't know how much that's going to work. But
doesn't that prevent HIV?
I've been told many things.
Oh well, you laugh, but I think there was a fellow who was brought up under the impression that regular ingestion of silver was a benefit, and now he looks like Papa Smurf.
But there's this weird thing, colloidal silver. I think that some extreme nutritional types are into.
The stream does not endorse any kind of alternative medicine or alternative facts.
Or alternative presidency. Okay, let's go on to. I'm going to see if this works.
Before you go on, I just wanted to add one thing.
Of course.
That picture, I think, sums up quite well how much he reminds me of that "guys really live like this" meme that's been going around. Where it's just like a chair and a TV in a big empty room.
Bedrooms of 4chan.
So he's like the embodiment of the masculine, minimalist living. He's got a table for his gruel, and a chair, and a fire, and a chamber pot, and that's basically all he needs in that room.
Yes, yeah.
A
I do
TV
also
and a-
basic.
A TV and a PlayStation, and it would be complete.
exactly.
Exactly.
I do also like the light. Even the light, if you look at it, it looks like it's like screaming in agony or horrified.
Yeah.
The light looks like it has a face of its own as well.
He's the John Lennon of his day.
He's rich enough. All right, okay. I'm going to see if this works. So we're going to be introduced to the first spirit.
And the Oscar for the
Okay.
special effects goes to.
I put in far too much effort to make that happen. So
It's appreciated.
the first ghost is going to get obnoxious by the third one, but you know, the first ghost is the spirit of Christmas past. Who wants to start us off?
Spirit of Christmas Past is one of the most ambiguous kind of depictions. It seems like it's difficult to determine its age. It sometimes seems like a child, sometimes old, even its sex, although I can't remember actually. It's a he, right? But it seems like feminine in a lot of the depictions. Kind of wistful, faint, soft voice. And takes Scrooge on a tour of some of his Christmases from childhood and young adulthood.
Yeah, it's just this amorphous shape. It's very strange, and it's something that I want to pick people's minds about. Is the past is depicted as this ever-changing. Sometimes when you look at it, it has one head and 3 arms. Sometimes it will have 5 heads and 12 arms. It's always shifting, and after his experiences going along with this spirit, when he looks at the spirit for the last time, it takes on the shapes of all of the people that he previously encountered. And I think it's very interesting that Dickens chose that the ghost of past is the amorphous, ever-changing shape, but the ghost of what's yet to come is this, you know, hard eye, and it's death, and there's no changing that. Whereas you could just as easily flip it over and have the future being something that's ever changing and up to you to decide, and the past set in stone.
Well, I think there's 2 main reasons for that. The first is it doesn't serve his story to allow the future to be amorphous, because otherwise Scrooge wouldn't have such a strong impetus to change. But the second, I think, is much more interesting in that I don't know that Dickens himself was very well schooled in psychology or human thought, but he was very adroit in recognizing it and representing it in his stories, in that the future, at least for Scrooge, was very fixed and focused on what the consequences of his actions were, as evidenced by the initial explanation conveyed to him by Marley, while the past was recharacterized through his recollections and the experiences provided him by the spirit of Christmas past. So he was able to basically remember what happened in the past, but recolorize it or recharacterize it rather as something different. Reframe it, yes. So the spirit is an embodiment of all the things that have impacted Scrooge throughout his life, and based upon where he focuses or where he places his attention, he can reframe it in a different way. So at certain times, you know, the Fezziwig is more prevalent. At other times, Belle is more prevalent. At other times, his sister is more prevalent, etc. So that amorphous, changing nature of the spirit of Christmas past is a really solid reflection of how people can change their focus and change what they pull out of their own individual past.
Yeah.
it's full of things that he's forgotten about as well, isn't it? The things that he shows in Scrooge, it's been completely pushed out of Scrooge's mind. He doesn't think about it anymore. And when he's made to think about it by being shown it again, it kind of reinvigorates him, doesn't it? Like, when he's thinking about the stories that he used to enjoy, because obviously he was left alone a lot as a child. It's all things that come flooding back to him that have been pushed out of his mind.
Yeah, I think both ways of having the characters, the spirits would work, but I think this way is a lot more of a modern interpretation, having as you say, him reframe the past. Both get caught up on that word. Having him reframe the past to suit his current mindset, as opposed to having the past set in stone. I think it's kind of more of a postmodern reading of it than you might expect in a Victorian book. The other thing that interests me is that he is determined to put his cap on the spirit, and I wonder what people think of that.
You mean the last scene where he pushes...
I think he wasn't. I thought he was pushing the spirit at that point. I thought was a light with a because they had a thing to snuff out candles.
Yeah,
and I think it had that hovering above its head, which is what's depicted here. And this is him pushing down the I don't know what it's called, a snuffer or something, over the light of the spirit to extinguish the spirit.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah, I think it's to extinguish.
He's not wrestling a giant pawn. It's actually a candle snuffer.
Playing a vuvuzela.
I mean, that then does kind of stick back to the whole psychological side of he's trying to push this away. He's trying to push away the memories, but the memories are also kind of represented as a light. Like, this is what kind of starts his journey to recovery. This is the holy light, the thing that can actually save him.
It basically tells him that he can't forget his own past. He can try to push it away, which he has been doing for a long time, but it will still always catch up with him.
Yeah, but there's also the hope in it being the light. It isn't some shadows that slowly come lurking in on him or something.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to read Young's interpretation of Christmas Carol. It's like the route we're going down at the moment. No, I think you're probably right. I think an extinguishing of the flame, because for me it was either that or it was a way of humanizing the character and kind of keep, as opposed to it being this amorphous shape, trying to have something on it that fixes it and keeps it as something familiar. But so I think your extinguishing idea is probably most accurate. Anything else we want to touch on? Or should we move on to...
Just he does sort of touch all three of the ghosts at some stage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, he physically interacts with them all in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think every time he touches their hand in some way. This one is to fly out the window and take him on a trip. He does it the same with the ghosts of present.
Mm-hmm.
The only one that doesn't offer his hand is the ghost of Christmas is yet to come, and obviously he forces himself to touch him at that stage.
One thing more about Christmas Past was I just wanted to ask people was in the book he mentions looking out the window and seeing all the other sort of enshackled creatures.
Mm-hmm.
I was just trying to remember if that's in any of the movie versions. It was something that seemed quite different to me. I don't remember that being in like any of the movie representations. Maybe I just forgot. But
no, I had a Berenstein moment with that because I thought that scene happened in Muppets Christmas Carol, but no, he does not look out the window and see a load of ghost Muppets.
That happens when Marty leaves, I think, that he sees all the shackled spirits.
Yeah.
Oh, was it with Marley? Well,
sorry.
Just a pneumatic drill going off in the background.
No bookshelf manufactured during the stream. Sorry.
Yes, no, that was with Marley. Okay, so the next character we're going to take a look at relating to the past is Fezziwig.
For a moment, I thought that was like he was flying, just hovering.
The ideal boss.
Yes, I think it's interesting that even from the get-go, Scrooge looks at him as being the optimal boss. So he already knows that what he's doing is damaging to himself and to the others around him. But obviously he carries on doing it anyway. It's not like he's in denial.
Yeah, right away he knows.
Yeah, but that kind of fits already with the fact that he's like a smoker, like an addict, and he knows it's bad, but he doesn't have the resolve to stop. He hasn't had the intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this whole experience gives him, I mean, conversion gives you freedom, from your worst self, and the same thing that happens with an addict.
As soon as he sees it, like you could have ended the book here. I think that Scrooge was actually convinced at this point that actually he's been leading his life incorrectly. Like the moment he was like, "Oh yeah, Fezziwig. Oh yeah, we used to have these parties. Oh, why don't I do that anymore?"
Well, you could see the whole middle section of the book as just three spirits bullying him. He already got the point, but I just want to rediscuss the same section again, and now through a slightly different lens. And you go, oh, I get it, but no, they keep pestering him. I don't know why they do that. It's
if you come on board very quickly.
If you're using a smoker though as the example, as the comparison, then it would work just the same. Because if you say to a smoker, if you cut, maybe you should stop smoking 20 a day because it's not going to be good for you. Oh yeah, I know. But it's the reinforcement, that even if they're on board with that comment, doesn't mean they're actually going to change their actions.
Yeah, they've really got to hammer it home, don't they?
Yeah, it's not until you show someone their gravestone that you think, oh, maybe I will. Even then, a lot of people won't change. But obviously, it works for Scrooge. Yeah, there's not much more to say about Fezziwig.
I feel like the whole Fezziwig scene could have been just like a musical section. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Well, Muppets Christmas Carol there is a section.
Yeah.
Is there a section in there? I can't actually remember. It would have been the optimal time to have one, and I don't think they do have one there.
Yeah, there's music. The Muppet Band plays.
Oh, the electric. What are they called?
I have a thought about the dancing, just to reinforce the fact that this sort of community dancing, where everyone dances with everybody at some point, and there's lots of interaction. I mean, this is how you build and bind, communities, as opposed to even couples dancing, which is more romantic, right? But like modern dancing, which is just sort of individuals kind of thrashing around.
Yeah,
you can only imagine the amount of Me Too moments that must be in the BBC version of this scene.
Rhythmic fits nowadays. Yeah, actually, that is a good point. He only references one song by name, which is Robert Clatherley, is it?
Yes, Robert.
I'm trying to remember where it places it, but it's somewhere around Reformation. I can't remember if it's pre or post, but it's interesting that. That yes, it's very classical. Even though it's a bit of a yarn, like a barn dance. You could I don't know. I can picture like a redneck scene going on with similar. You've got a fiddle player and everything. So it's not this glamorous event, but you still have this you still have a time where they introduce this classical music, and it's still a callback to tradition.
I mean, it's pre-redneck, isn't it? So it's maybe where the rednecks went.
Yeah, I'm sure that country music is based on Christmas Carol. Let's go on to Belle, the last of the people related to the ghost of past. There we are. So, what do people want to say about Belle? She kind of sums up the transition that Scrooge has. From prioritizing human relation to prioritizing money.
Well, she kind of leaves him because he doesn't want to commit to her, because he doesn't feel comfortable, as in He's unsure if he can provide for her, as far as I understand it. Might be that this is a bit of Mandela effect from watching too many movie adaptations, but she basically leaves him because he doesn't want to commit to the relationship as he commits to his business dealings.
And I don't know how, it doesn't really talk about whether she gives him much of an ultimatum or anything. It's just, you're behaving this way, now go.
I think she just knows. She sees that there's no real feeling there. It's only an obligation that he's still committed to her.
I mean, maybe he hadn't thought about it.
Well, who knows? But the interaction happens, and she leaves, and he sees her happy with a family, and it's one of the biggest kicks in the teeth, I think, is that he has lost the potential to have a family of his own.
But it doesn't snap him out of it, does it? At the time, it doesn't snap it out of him. He, if anything, he gets worse.
Yeah, well, yes, the rejection by her at the beginning it probably makes him worse. But when he then sees her with the family, with her children, with her husband, it really brings home the fact that he's lost out on this family dynamic.
And that's what actually,
ex, do you?
and that's what prompts him to basically snuff out the candle of the past.
Yes, that's what pushes him over the edge. This is what happens when you have childless leaders. They prioritize material things. Okay.
Well, I mean, I think it's strike that and reverse it. The reason they're childless is because they prioritize material.
Yeah.
But even when he's
Ergo propter hoc and all that.
And one of the core things about this that I'm seeing upon a rereading is the first interaction when she actually rejects him. She's apparently in mourning dress, which means that she is mourning a loss or something. So it's entirely possible that someone important to both of them died, and reading between the lines, it might very well have been Fezziwig.
Mm-hmm.
So conceivably, that loss is what really struck Scrooge and turned him toward material, away from the for lack of a better term, spiritual.
Yes, you're probably right there. The death of the death of the boss that didn't prioritize the material. So he's lost that one figure, and then he loses another figure, and the fact that he's lost the relationship he has with her, probably drove it.
It's the whole thing is just full of things that he must have known, and obviously does know, but it needs a G up, and that's probably why he comes on board so quick, because all these things he knows.
And one of the things that struck me was Scrooge's interaction with Belle about the fact that he never actually argues with her. He just asks her questions, and there's no understanding or ability to communicate the core of his problem or his concern. It's always oblique and vaguely referenced. Have I ever sought release in words? No, never. In what then? He's basically clinging to materialist strict interpretation when emotionally he's withdrawing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also, I don't know if maybe I'm revealing too much about myself here, but I don't know if you've ever been in an argument where the get out of answering a question is just to, retort with a question. I feel like that is also happening with him, where he kind of knows the love. He knows the love is lost, but he doesn't want to admit it. So he just he just asks peripheral questions as opposed to actually tackling the main issue. So let's go on
You could totally could have, saved this relationship if he just sort of turned around a bit.
I'm not sure he could have. I mean, the way that I'm reading it, again, he wasn't the one that wanted to cut off the relationship, and neither of the two of them were sufficiently emotionally mature to approach the relationship directly and solve the core problem. In fact, Scrooge avoided discussion about that.
I mean, she ain't no gold digger.
On that note,
perfectly timed that was.
We're correct. This will get annoying by the third one.
Yeah, well, yeah. I feel I might introduce it to every stream now.
If something's worth doing, it's worth doing 1,000 times.
It's worth doing 3 times at least. Okay, the spirit of Christmas present. Who wants to touch on him?
He's an old timey Santa, isn't he? I guess.
Well, he's a combination of what we would look at as being Santa now, and he's very pagan. He's very green man. I mean, he's literally dressed in green now. But the entire time, it's kind of this synthesis between what we know of now and the pagan traditions that influenced Christmas to begin with.
Yeah, and
you can see where they got a lot of the ideas for Father Christmas from, like the ability to change size and all that kind of stuff.
This generosity, openness and everything. I mean, and kind of enjoyment is Bacchic in nature as well. I wouldn't say Dionysian, but Bacchic, because the Romans just emphasized the sort of jolly nature of, Bacchus.
Mm-hmm. And there's even reference to the Horn of Plenty. There's callbacks to certain, Greek and Roman myths in some of the references as well. So it really is an all-encompassing piece.
And I think one reason that the present is represented in this way is that Dickens is sort of suggesting that our present is a feast, but we might not appreciate that fact. We just have to sort of embrace it.
This portrayal is probably the one element within here that would be most strongly derided or objected to by the Puritans and by the existing structure. This is where Dickens makes his core argument against the puritanical approach of the current zeitgeist.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that it's the ghost of the present that's embodying that. It's kind of him putting his foot down and saying, "This is what we're going back. We're taking what we've had previously, and this is what we're going to be as of now."
This is the resurrecting merry old England.
Exactly. Yeah. Bring back the maypole dancers.
Exactly.
There's a couple of quotes, we've touched on one already, but there's a couple of quotes that he raises that will be interesting to go into. So the first one is his claim that people act in his name, but they don't know him. I think what do people think of that? I think that the way I take it is that, again, along this kind of puritanical divide, there's been a history of people acting in the name of Christ or for the for a greater cause of God. But he's kind of saying, I don't know these people. They're acting. They're claiming to act in my name, but truly they know nothing of me.
Just referring to the shutting the shops bit.
Yes, yeah. So in the scene, it's talking about people shutting their shops during Christmas, but I think for the greater story of the book, it's any kind of tradition that's being forced upon people that he's saying is being used in my name, but really has nothing to do with.
Can I interject with a plot hole?
Yes. If
the shops are closed on Christmas, how is he able to buy the turkey in the end?
Well, they're not, but they're semi-shut, aren't they? That is what's said.
Yeah, the half closed shutters, aren't they, and things like that.
Well, I mean, it basically looks like they're obeying the letter of the law, but they're violating the spirit of the law, and that they're shut, but they're still conducting business despite their being shut.
Mhm.
You know, it's the same way that people are saying, you know, I can't sell you this, but if I happen to see it missing and I happen to see the same amount of money I would expect to get paid for it, I'm not going to call the cops for, you know, you having stolen it.
Sure, okay, fine. But if that's true, then business is being done. So that would mean that Bob Cratchit shouldn't deserve a day off.
It's hard to celebrate Christmas properly if you're at work, right?
I think it's a bit of a difference.
These are just things that keep me awake at night, okay?
I thought it was your bad gruel.
Yeah, there's more gravy than grave to these comments you're making.
A morsel of undigested cheese.
So that's that comment, and I think we can agree on that. The other one is the children that are in his under his robe that he. I think he sees a claw stick out. Ebenezer sees a claw stick out, and he kind of introduces these children that come out. And I've got the quote here because it's a bit of a strange one, but I want to dive into it a little. So he says, "They cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom. Unless the writing be erased, deny it." What do you make of that?
It's
Because
weird.
yeah, it's very strange, and it is the most confusing
It does.
part of the text.
It feels like grafted in, doesn't it? Like it doesn't flow with the rest of it. It just seems like he's making it felt like reading it that he was just trying to make an additional statement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it struck me as the most incongruous part of the entire story.
Yes.
It seemed grafted on, but
I mean, I think it's just about avarice. I think that saying that the children are ignorance and want, that's obviously, he's kind of saying that that's the issue that Scrooge is facing, that he's put ignorance and want above the next generation. And that if he doesn't change it, doom is written on the brow of the future. But it's very strange, and I don't even know.
Or maybe the other way around. Maybe the other way around, that the children are want and ignorance, and that how do you put it? Scrooge still has these in him, like he's not grown out of them. He's not grown up himself.
So you think they're they're part of Scrooge's psychology? Something
Possibly.
like
I mean, would Scrooge be want? I mean, I don't even know if it's ignorance, because he knows these things that he's being shown. He's just chose to shut them out. You know, he must know. He knows about Tiny Tim.
Well, ignorance is something that one can be intentionally ignorant, as well as
willful ignorance.
Well, that's why I think the two of them together is where it makes sense. Ignorance and want on their own, but the fact that it's saying that he's ignorantly wanting kind of sums him up. He's intentionally ignorant to anything else apart from his desire to accumulate.
Yeah, I mean, his want isn't even clear, is it? I mean, why want money for the sake of wanting money? You know.
Well, it's entirely possible the want isn't money. It's wanting humanity or relationships with people. And that's what he's intentionally being willfully ignorant and ignoring the actual want in deference to the material want. Because the core of Scrooge's soul knows what is good and right and true, as it were. And he's just intentionally turning from that towards something else, and he's empowering ignorance and not satisfying his want, so he's eventually starving himself intentionally.
I'm just looking at it now, and the other way I'm thinking is perhaps that it's a reference to Tiny Tim. If he remains ignorant of that of Tiny Tim's situation, then obviously doom is on the brow of Tiny Tim because he will die unless Scrooge changes his ways. But again, I'm not sure. It's very interesting. This is what keeps me up at night. What are you talking about, Dickens? Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of people that have done a better job trying to deconstruct it than I can do. But it's everything else is very jovial and just filled with witticisms and everything.
It's very abstract, isn't it?
Yeah, you get this.
The rest of it.
It's very strange.
It's a bit like the Lord of the Flies bit in Lord of the Flies, isn't it? It's almost, it stands out from the rest of it, just, because it's more abstract. It's all quite real. Yeah. Even though the ghosts and things, but it's still real, isn't it?
You mean the part where the Lord of the Flies is speaking?
Yeah.
I think I've just skipped forward. Move back.
It's very different from the rest of the story.
Okay. Well, as I've just given a sneak preview.
Well, I just wanted to interrupt you just before you change slide once again to say he is going around with this big quote incense burner and quite clearly getting everyone high that he gets in contact with.
No. Do you know?
Oh, you got the gong.
You got the bell, right?
That's the second time.
Maybe you need the gong on a button. Just
yeah, I might keep that.
Stamp your authority on the screen.
Right. Christmas.
This is the most powerful quote yet.
Yes, I think this sums up the character very well. It's not actually a direct quote. I'm paraphrasing. So yes, the spirits of Christmas yet to come. As you can see, he doesn't make a single comment in the entire thing. He's completely silent and only directs Scrooge by pointing. And he takes him through a journey of showing that no one is sorry at the death of Scrooge, who is willfully ignorant of the fact that it's his own death that he's talking about throughout the entire thing. I can't believe for a second that he doesn't know it's him. He's just in denial, surely.
But there's a scene just beforehand that anticipates this, the game of yes and no, I think it is, where they have a guessing game. I think it's at the nephew's place.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, it does kind of hint at what's about to happen.
There's also this thing in psychology that if somebody gets really bad news, they will deny it. So, for example, if a policeman would tell a father that his son had died, then the reply could be, "I have no son." That's just really blocking it out, and that might be happening to him. He does know, but he does not want to accept, or he can't accept it.
Oh, the 7 stages of grief, isn't it? Is that correct?
I
don't know about 7, but yeah, it's the stages of grief.
It's a reaction to extremely bad news. That one way to deal with it is just deny that it ever could have happened. That person who it pertains to doesn't exist. So you basically totally block it, and that might be happening here.
Yeah, I went down the psychology route with this because in my head it's I thought of what they're meant to do in therapy, which is so it's claimed that they can't give you the answers. They can only point you in the right direction and kind of give you the structures in which you can decide on the correct action yourself. It's kind of he's not actually giving him any information. He's only pointing to things that Scrooge is already aware of, but he's there to assist him along the way. There's not really much else I can say about the Spirit of Christmas. He's the most he's quite a daunting figure. I think he's described very well.
He's described as death. Is that something that we ascribe to that figure, or is that something that would already been known in Victorian times?
Yes, that's been around for a while. He doesn't actually carry a scythe, does he? But
No.
No.
but
I think in every other way he is.
yeah.
He's there.
Well, that actually brings me to one point that I find very interesting in him not saying anything, is that Scrooge keeps begging him that, at least towards the end, that, oh, please tell me that I can change this. Please tell me that, like, in my actions I can actually make this not be my future. And, well, as he doesn't know, as he obviously just doesn't speak at any point, the ghost never says or indicates anything that he actually can.
Yes, so I think it's kind of the only way you can find out the answer is by taking the correct action and seeing for yourself.
Well, Scrooge might still be doomed that he becomes a nice person, and then in the end, people still don't. That this still happens.
Yeah, exactly. But you're only ever going to you're never going to find out once you've gone. Well, he's unlikely to know the answer, but the only way that he can leave a legacy which is worth remembering is by him taking these actions.
Yeah, there's the idea that he might not be able to help himself, but he could help others in the meantime.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, we do know that he can change it because Tiny Tim spies.
Yeah, I mean, but that's also not helping Scrooge, is it? That won't necessarily stop Scrooge being title filing cabinet.
No, yeah. But it doesn't matter. Yeah, for Scrooge, the lesson is that he's learned that it doesn't matter anymore, even if he is beyond the time where he should have changed himself so that other people will remember him well. He knows at least that Tiny Tim is left safe.
But initially, it's to save himself as opposed to save anybody else, isn't it? And then it becomes about saving Tiny Tim later on.
But what you're telling me there, that what's important is other people's perception, is that virtue signaling is important, or what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah, but he's not virtue signaling, is he? He's actually helping people,
donating to charities and things like that. So.
Well, no, he's going to help.
No, he's personally he's acting virtuously personally. That's one of the things that is mentioned in Stave 5, or whatever. Stave 5 is that he actually embodies it.
It's the Aristotelian view of you have to, your actions are excellence. What's the quote is excellence is a habit. Basically, you have to embody what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to virtue signaling, which is just saying that you're trying to achieve something and then throwing money at it.
Yeah, it's acting out your, as opposed to projecting.
His demeanor changes. Everybody recognizes that around him, right?
Yeah. So, anything else to say on the spirit of Christmas yet to come, or should we move on to the minor characters? I put the bell away.
Something you need to get cut off by the bell.
I could say that how do we know that he's a reliable narrator and that he's actually that his depiction of the future is honest? Maybe Tiny Tim was never going to die, and he's just using that to shock Scrooge into action.
Yeah, well, we're not reading Fight Club yet, are we?
They're basically bullying him.
But you've worked hard on the bong, so
yeah. Let's hit the bong again.
I am Scrooge's perception of the future.
I am Scrooge's undigested food. All right, enough of this. So the minor characters. I don't have a great deal to say about any of the people that we have listed.
Well, you have the minors.
You've missed the chubby girl out.
Yeah, well, what does she contribute to the story? And Topper.
I don't know.
It doesn't have everyone.
Yeah,
I can't
they
list
had fun
everyone.
chasing around the room, though, didn't they?
Yes. Anything that anyone wants to cover on these?
I like Remarkable Boy's own version of humbug, which I had to look up, which is Walker. It's a very Victorian exclamation.
Yeah, do you want to explain what that is? Because I've read your explanation a couple of times and I'm still a bit confused.
Well, I had to look it up, so I had to Google it. Not being a Victorian myself, but apparently there's this I have to scroll back. This full expression, which is hooky walker, which was basically, you would say in the same instance when Scrooge says humbug, when he says, well, oh, that's nonsense, because what Scrooge is asking the boy to do is to buy the big turkey and then bring it back, and then he says, well, yeah, that's nonsense, you're just pulling my leg, and that's his response. But the term walker, which he says is something we don't use anymore, while humbug has become, well, if I use it, everybody, especially around Christmas, everybody instantly knows what you're talking about. So I thought it was interesting that that was what kind of lost, and was one of those things that kept me awake at night.
It probably wasn't used in the later remakes and interpretations.
No,
Whereas
no.
humbug.
It is in the book.
Yeah, I think it's still well known. I still hear people say humbug.
Oh yeah, humbug.
Well, Boris Johnson said it, didn't he? In the
No, I'm talking about using walker and not humbug.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say.
No, humbug is well known because it's such a signifier of the story. Although it's not used that much. Scrooge uses it a couple of times in the beginning, and then he wants to say it at the end of the first chapter, but he stops himself. He just pronounces the H, and from that moment on, he doesn't use it anymore, which also signals that he already is changing. And so in the end, this boy is using a similar term, but a different one that other people would use. But yeah, it was kind of strange. It's kind of remarkable.
If you want to, waste half an hour of your life, like I did, go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out where the origins of humbug are, because there's so many different ideas of the etymology. It's quite interesting. There's no clear, definitive answer, but it's fun.
Any that you want to tell us?
Do you know? To be honest, off the top of my head, no. I know that obviously, basically, it all comes down to whether or not it was derived from other languages, or whether or not it was humming bug, because it's just something that makes a lot of noise but is meaningless. But there's basically a lot of different words that could either be that you could get to from both bug and hum. I go read it yourself, because I no, I don't have anything else to say on that. But it was quite interesting.
Mentions humbug, the Wizard of Oz. So
yes, it's used quite a lot in that as well.
Yeah, like he's an old humbug, meaning like he's a faker. It's not, he's not a real wizard.
Yeah, so it's either someone malicious or basically a liar, or it's something that just makes a lot of noise but is pointless. They're basically the three possible derisions. There's one about Irish money as well, where basically it could have been derived from fake copper coins in Ireland. But anyway, let's move on. So this is something that I want to get a bit of a discussion going. We covered classic Gothic themes when we did Frankenstein, and I want to see where people stand on whether or not they think this is a Gothic novel or not, because it's something that's always been up in the air. At the beginning, before rereading this and diving into it more, I would have said no, but now I am thoroughly convinced this is the one of the best examples of classic Gothic literature, and I will fight anyone that challenges me on this. So what I wanted to do, I listed the points that were previously gone through on, like I say, on the Frankenstein stream, and I think it hits the nail on the head on all of them. When it comes to the political influence, it's clear that the whole reason he wrote this was to make moves in social care for one another and preventing the Industrial Revolution from breaking societal connections. Medievalism is seen. It's probably the weakest of the lot, but there are hints to it throughout it.
The Merry Old England kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of more of a. It's the spirit of medievalism as opposed to actual.
Well, it's more of a peasant story than a medieval story.
Yeah. The biggest one is the macabre and the morbid, and this is why I wanted to put the grotesques on there, because I think this is what really embodies it. When we want to compare this to something like Frankenstein, there's no humor. It's so woe is me, and Dickens even uses the phrase "woe is me" when Marley's speaking, as a way of there's humor to it. And this is why the grotesque, I think it sums it up very well, where it's got this, it's the macabre, but it isn't just macabre. It's a bit playful. There's a bit of fun with it, and it's the way that they added pathos to death. It's the way that they kind of they're a bit more playful with it than some of the modern ways that we now view Gothic. Gothic now, you think of Poe, and it's very serious. Although he did have some humor to him, it is very serious. A lot of people interpret it, but it didn't used to be that way. It was comical in the interactions between death and humor.
I collect Day of, well, they're known as Day of the Dead, but they're really All Souls Day skeletons from Mexico. They have that sort of spirit, treating death in a kind of jovial manner.
Yeah, exactly. That's very much in the same vein as I'm thinking.
The whole thing is upbeat and positive, isn't it? Generally, at the end, well, especially, it's not a negative story, is it?
Not at all.
Well, I mean, even the Ghost of Christmas Present is very upbeat.
Yeah, but he doesn't make
him especially. I mean,
he does make Scrooge happy in the end, because he realizes, like, okay, I'm not part of this. But the whole story structure wise is that you have this arc where he goes down in tone, being visited by the three spirits, and at the end there's this release, this catharsis of him being able, like, oh God, I'm still alive, and there's my apartment, and here's all my stuff, and it's beautiful, and he opens the window and he's happy, and that's basically the moment that he changes from somebody who really fears death, and he sees his own death, and then he because of this he has this miraculous change that he becomes this jovial and happy person.
But he's waiting for it, isn't he? I mean, from the first visit, I mean, definitely after the second visit, he knows what he has to do. He knows what's going on. He knows that it has to change. Even
the first visit
is the case after the first one.
The first visit is basically the downward leg, the descent into hell, and then the second leg, the second spirit is the ascent, but it's a false ascent, and then the third is again reinforcing the initial descent into hell, and then you have the actual true resurrection at the end. So
yeah, but I mean, if you didn't have the third ghost, he'd still change his ways, wouldn't he?
I don't know.
That's an argument.
I mean, but he's already asked about Tiny Tim, and he's like, oh no, that's terrible, and he regrets what he says about people who aren't worth.
Well, this is the argument: is that he says those things, but we don't know what he would act out.
I mean, there's also the addition of if this book was aimed at someone like Scrooge, suppose what Scrooge was reading through this book for whatever bloody reason, then that final part is an extra layer of motivation that, like, okay, even if you are as cold as you seem to be, at least you can see that it would also result in your own demise. So it is kind of the final nail in the coffin of keep doing what you're doing.
Exactly, and it also lends itself to being Gothic in that this sort of this encounter with death leads to it's once you have accepted your mortality, it's how he kind of embraces the better sides of life, and this is kind of a Gothic theme as well. Like I say, that it's that understanding of death and being playful with it. But you can't really be he couldn't be playful with anything before, but once he realizes his own mortality, that's when joy can come in, because he can enjoy the fleeting parts of life.
Yeah, he can make the best of the time that he has.
It's basically that he realizes that his days on this earth are finite and that he has to do something with it.
Yes.
Also, you could see it as a midlife crisis where he is looking back at his own life. What have I done? What have I become? And what will happen to me if I keep going down this road? And
He's projecting again.
Yeah, I know, but you are doing the same thing. But the you see this with the midlife crisis, and it might be that Dickens took inspiration of these kind of crises. Like, okay, I need to change my life at some point, and that's so. But you'd see the structure in the story, and he realized that his time on this earth is limited, and that's why he changes. He realized I need to do something more useful than just count money every day and do nothing with it.
Yeah, I mean, he relies on the fact that Scrooge is inherently a good person as well. Like, if he was solely a material person, then you wouldn't need to show him the stuff with Tiny Tim, would you? You just basically say, look, this is what's going to happen when you're going to die, and you are going to die soon if you don't change your ways. I mean, if he was a selfish person or just generally a bad person, then you wouldn't need to show him the other stuff.
And that's the big difference with a lot of adaptations where he's shown as basically being evil. While in
that BBC one being the prime example.
Even in the Muppet version, he's shown as more evil than in the book because he's stingy, but he's not like a dragon sitting on top of a big pile of gold, and he doesn't show off his wealth. He's just somebody feels like he's unable to cope with the world and just shut himself off. But as a result, he treats the world really nastily. That's his way of coping with it. And and the world turns its back on him as a result. So he has to learn that he has to open up to the world so the world can respond to him.
Yeah, he has to learn that he's responsible for the position that he's in, basically.
Exactly.
Okay. So no challenges to it being Gothic.
I have no idea what exactly Gothic and non-Gothic is, so I'm just gonna let you go on this one.
Well, you've only read 3 books so far, so
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm whether it's Gothic or not.
Given your interpretation of Gothic, I'd say that it matches that interpretation, but I would argue strenuously that it's not really all that.
It doesn't feel Gothic to me.
Yeah, it doesn't have the florid prose. It doesn't have the pacing. It doesn't have the ponderousness of traditional Gothic.
Well,
writing.
I would argue that is not traditional Gothic, and that is the modern Gothic, which is in its own right, still enjoyable. But I think that this is the reason it doesn't feel like Gothic now is that what we know as Gothic now is the modern version, and this would fit closer with the classic version.
That's the argument.
Element? Would your Gothic include like the romantic element?
Yes. Well, I would say that Gothic was the dark counterpart to romantic.
Because I would say this is the opposite of a romantic vision.
Like it was the dark counterpart of romantic.
But not even that. Like everything, nothing. It's very. It's material, isn't it? The whole thing. I don't know if I'm describing it right, but it doesn't feel. It's not as abstract as what I imagine. If you were describing something in a romantic way or the opposite of a romantic way, you wouldn't do it how this book does it.
Well, I don't think it is all material because literally the vast majority of the book is encounters with spirits that change his mind. And the one of the big things with classic Gothic was a rejection of the rationalist mindset and taking on emotion as the root of all experience. And I think this does that to a T, because he even mentions the argument as to whether or not the spirits are just undigested food and he's having these visions, or whether or not they're real. And if you're looking at it as a classic Gothic novel, then ultimately that doesn't matter because it's the emotional transformation that he has throughout the journey.
Yeah, I mean, the emotional and spiritual is certainly very important in this novel.
I mean, he's definitely invoking that in him, but I don't know, it just seems like it's done in a very material way.
I think you're over-broadening the definition of Gothic to fit your narrative.
Well, maybe this would be a good discussion some other time. Let's go on to I'll let you all fight this one out, and I'll just sit here and be depressed at the fact that you're taking on such postmodern interpretations of the book.
Well, given the fact that it's just a fairy tale and trying to learn as a morality, it doesn't really effective. So basically, it wants to learn us that being merry and happy around Christmas and your fellow man has its rewards above the material.
But they're spiritual rewards.
That's what I take away from it.
They're spiritual rewards. That you know, it's a story about conversion and being free. You know, which is having your freedom given back to you in the sense that you're not trapped by your addiction or your vices. You're actually able to choose something else.
Well, it also
the Christmas element. Sorry,
I was just going to say it goes back to Fred's quote about, you know, that there are great things that from which he's benefited, from which he's also derived no actual tangible profit. You know, that spiritual profit and spiritual value is just as valuable from a nourishment of humanity perspective as actual tangible wealth. And that, I think, is the core message of the book, which is not a particularly Gothic message.
I mean, you could completely remove the Christmas element, couldn't you? I mean, the Christmas element is
absolutely
a device, and it's a marketing tool, isn't it?
Well, no, it's not a marketing tool. I think we're looking at it from our perspective, looking back on it. But if you think of it at the time, it was being used to establish. It's only easy to dismiss the Christmas element now because we have Christmas established. But this was one of the books that helped establish what Christmas is as we know it. So I do think
Christmas should be about, as opposed to what it is now.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's about presents, Christmas.
But it's a positive materialism, isn't it, in the story, as opposed to a negative materialism now.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I think it's needed now just as much as it was then. But for the opposite end, it's not that we've just come out at the other end of Reformation and are in need of this. It's that the material side of it, well, in some ways it is the same. It's the material side of it is dominated.
You could look at it now that, you know, with the C word, that it's almost like that again, isn't it? Like the material side of Christmas we've got covered, but the other side of Christmas, which is family and being together, is now the side that people are going to start to realize because of the situation, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is the core loss this year, especially. Like I say, because people have still got the material side covered, haven't they? You know, you can buy as many presents as you want, you can give them to as many people as you want, you can have as big a turkey as you want. But
when you said the C word, I got confused why you're being so coy about saying the word Christmas, and then I realized what you're talking about.
No, I was being daft, but yeah.
No, yeah, exactly.
Do we think?
Yeah, I mean, you could say that it's a good story for this particular Christmas.
Speaking of this particular Christmas, I believe that Boris Johnson is giving us our measly 5 days because he doesn't want to be compared to Cromwell.
Where's the bell?
I say that Boris doesn't want to be dragged through the street. Well, actually, I'd say it's more akin to blowing the conch and nobody turning up.
Well, there's a classic officer rule in the military is never give an order you know won't be obeyed. Because it just undermines your authority.
And
don't
blow the conch.
I mean, it's been undermined enough that I think that any further, especially around this period, it's just going to completely break the back of any idea that of state authority.
Yeah,
but getting back to
heard recently,
getting back to A Christmas Carol.
That's exactly why he needs to do it.
One can dream, but no. Let's go back to Christmas Carol. Branding.
Yeah, I was just going to say, getting back to Christmas Carol. The message is basically not tied to Christmas. Christmas is just the vehicle Dickens uses to convey the message. Probably because Christmas itself originated as a pagan holiday for renewal and rebirth, and all of the cyclical elements in nature about planning for the future and celebrating what you have. It's the harvest festival when you have nothing to harvest, or in anticipation of having a harvest. So it's a good time to yeah, it resonates with that desire with the rest of humanity. So it's a good opportunity to reinforce the connectedness of the group.
I mean, it's the fact that in the time period nobody had a lot of possessions anyway, especially in the general population. People would have had many possessions, would they? And they won't have treated themselves that often. So the one time of the year when they would treat themselves and would spend more money than they would normally is Christmas.
Imagine no possessions.
Not hard. Christine, you make your point, and then I'll say what I think.
He specifically mentions and quotes Christ several times, so it's not. I don't think you can take the birth of Christ out of it.
Yeah, I thought that was the route that you're going down, and I agree. I think that Christmas is a spiritual birth, and this is what he wanted this book to be as well. Is a birth of a rejection of. I know that they had gone post Reformation already, but it was a rejection of some of the long-standing Reformation ideas that were still around, and it was a spiritual birth of this rebirth of Christmas itself. So the birth, I think the idea of it being this birthing ceremony is quite important to the story.
And Scrooge is reborn.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and that echoes the ancient pagan festival of Saturnalia.
Yeah.
Like I say, I think that the only reason we can now remove Christmas out of the story is because the story was so successful. But prior to that, it would be essential to have it in there.
Well, again, I think Christmas is a resonance for the message, which is timeless.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the device of showing people things that have happened and are happening in order to make them do something that they wouldn't otherwise have done is pretty common now, isn't it? There's so many stories I've seen in popular.
So I actually think it works better without the too much of a Christian element, because otherwise it would be because you're celebrating the birth of Christ, and then you're nice because of religious reason, because there's a God, and here you learn that you have to be nice because it has basically benefits to yourself for being nice its own sake. So making it overly religious also, and on top of that makes it vulnerable to attack from all kind of sides, like, oh yeah, this is just a religious morality tale, and then it's easier to dismiss as it is.
And you as a freelance pisser.
So it's very layered, let me say that.
Are there any other interpretations that we have of it? I know someone was went down the road of some homoerotic undertones.
That person should be struck off.
Is anyone brave enough to admit to that?
That the BBC would do, like, mourning his partner Jacob Marley.
Yeah, I'm very surprised they didn't take that line, actually.
Yeah.
Well, they couldn't because he was molested as a child. So.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Implications.
They can't combine those two events into one character, otherwise, danger zone.
I'm going to pull a Burton Ernie.
Okay. Any others that we want to dive into? I think that's covered all of your.
Well, yeah. From a story point of view, he could have died at the end of chapter 1. That would also explain why he can see ghosts. But that's
We're not going down the lost route.
Yeah, it could all be just a fantasy in his mind, and in fact, that's fundamentally what the story says it is. But it could just be dreams and imaginations. That doesn't change
the very fact that Scrooge suggests it would imply that it's not.
Yeah, but that whether it really happened or not, that there is a tangible benefit in the story. So the implication is that doesn't matter.
I'm glad that you've said that, because I feel like I'm turning into like Michel Foucault, because I feel like I make that point in every book that we discussed so far. It doesn't actually matter whether or not these events took place. It's the emotion, it's the journey that they take internally. Either way. Okay.
I mean, the book is pretty emotional. Well, I thought it was. But it's only because it involves, children
Money.
and stuff.
Yeah.
No. Do you have a chat?
I was welling up all the time.
Yeah,
that's not profit.
Resonates. Okay. Final thing to touch on. There's not really anything I want to cover when it comes to the critical response. It was universally loved. There's no criticisms whatsoever that are worthwhile discussing. I actually left this slide on there because I read the Chesterton quote, but there was another one just on our discussions of whether or not Christmas needs to be included. Let me just bring it up. This is why I thought it was important to include it. If Christmas, with its ancient and hospitable customs, its social and charitable observances, were ever in danger of decay, this is the book that would give them a new lease. That was Thomas Hood, who I think was a mayor of London and a poet.
And we were saying that it actually did give it a
yeah, exactly. It's done it once before, and I think it can do it again.
So you're telling me that the war on Christmas is real?
No, COVID Christmas. It's got to bring us back from...
Silence. I need to delete that. I'm going to use it far too much. Right. Are there any last words that we have before I conclude this?
There is actual value in human relationships and human interactions that is not quantifiable materially, and all human value hierarchies need to take that into account.
Yes, I should hope anyone that listening to this understands that already, but if you don't, then yes, that's a valuable takeaway from the book.
Or we should find a better way of making them materially measurable.
No. Going down the utilitarian. No.
Another gong, please.
Yeah. Right. So
just review Menger's theory of imputed values and get back to me.
Right.
It was not a serious.
No. We're going down a black hole now. All right. So to conclude, everyone should go and read this, especially given the time. And our next book that we'll be covering is going to be Brave New World. We're going to be doing that on the 3rd of January, same time as always. If you have any other books or any comments you want to leave, you know where to put them. I don't need to shill any further, I hope. And unless there's anything else anyone wants to say, we'll leave it there.
Yeah, I have a question.
Do I have to bong this?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So why doesn't Tarzan have a beard?